When we think about genius, we usually picture a lightning strike, right? A frantic, brilliant flash of inspiration that just changes the world in an instant. But what if I told you that the greatest mind of the 20th century wasn't built on speed at all, but on a radical, almost defiant commitment to being slow? We're about to dive into a story that's going to challenge how you think about, thinking itself. This is the story of the curiosity habit and how one man's incredible patience literally bent the fabric of reality.
That young man, of course, was Albert Einstein. And his earth-shattering idea, the theory of special relativity, it wasn't born in some fancy lab or a prestigious university. Nope. It was forged in the quiet moments of a totally ordinary life, inside the Swiss patent office in Bern. And the breakthrough wasn't fueled by some sudden insight, but by a single, simple question that he had been patiently wrestling with for 10 long years.
This was it. This was the question. A simple, almost childlike puzzle he first came up with as a teenager. What would happen if you could run alongside a beam of light at the exact same speed? What would you actually see? Now, while the rest of the scientific world was busy with complex experiments and super intricate math, Einstein was just patiently, relentlessly turning this one single image over and over in his mind. And that decade-long obsession, it would eventually reveal a crack in the very foundation of physics, a contradiction that literally no one else had even noticed. So, how in the world did he do it? To find out, we're going to follow his journey in 6 parts. We'll start with the paradox of this humble patent clerk, then we'll see how early struggles actually forged his mind. We'll dive deep into his philosophy of slow thinking, check out the daily routine that powered his revolution, understand the incredible legacy his patience created, and finally, discover how the speed of your own pause can unlock your best ideas. All right, let's kick it off. Part 1, the clerk who remade reality. This is where we get into the central paradox of Einstein's genius, how the most extraordinary ideas in modern history came out of the most ordinary, even kind of boring setting. You see, that job wasn't a distraction from his real work. For Einstein, that mundane job was the absolute key. At the heart of his whole method is this idea, the curiosity habit. Now, this is not about having a sudden aha moment. It's the exact opposite. It's the act of sustained, deliberate mental slowness. It's about finding a question so fundamental it almost seems absurd, and then just patiently staring at that absurdity for years, until the contradictions you uncover finally force an old reality to just crumble. And this really shows you just how countercultural his approach was. I mean, the typical academic path, then and now, it's a race, right? A frantic rush for answers, this huge pressure to publish, and this unspoken rule that you have to work within the established frameworks. Einstein just flipped that whole thing on its head. He patiently confronted absurdity. His goal wasn't to publish, it was pure, simple understanding. He wasn't trying to build on the old framework. He was looking for the one little flaw that would bring the whole thing down. But where does a mindset like that even come from? I mean, the courage to just dismantle the known world? Well, that brings us to part 2, forged by early friction. Because you see, Einstein's greatest strengths weren't born from ease. They were hammered into shape by his struggles. Right from the beginning, Einstein's mind just worked differently. He was slow to speak as a kid, so much so that his parents were actually worried. In school, he rebelled against the rigid, rote memorization that was demanded by the German system. And this wasn't just him being a defiant teenager. It was a fundamental incompatibility. His mind thought in vivid pictures and spatial relationships, not just in words and numbers, which made the traditional classroom a place of constant friction for him. And this is the key. This is so important. Because he struggled with words, because he couldn't just passively accept and repeat information, he was forced to master a totally different kind of intelligence, visual intuition. He couldn't just memorize a definition of gravity or time. He had to see it. He had to feel it in his mind's eye. And that necessity forced him to question the very fabric of space and time in a way that people who just accepted the textbook definitions never could. You can trace this path all through his life. At age 5, his dad shows him a simple pocket compass. He is completely mesmerized. What invisible force could possibly be acting on this little needle, making it point north? It sparks this lifelong fascination with unseen forces. Then, as a teenager, he comes up with that crucial light beam thought experiment. And then, as a young man, he makes a brilliant strategic move. Instead of chasing a fancy academic job, he takes a quiet gig as a patent clerk, a role designed not for ambition, but to protect his most valuable asset, his time to sink. And that protection of his time, it wasn't just a practical choice. It was part of a much deeper philosophy. This brings us to part 3, the philosophy of slow thought, or what we can call soulful productivity. This is where we move beyond his personal history to the core beliefs that guided all of his revolutionary work. Soulful productivity. It's this radical idea that truly groundbreaking work isn't about being busy. It's about prioritizing deep contemplation and raw curiosity over the endless modern demand for more output and faster results. It's the method for working slowly to think faster. It's a total rejection of the myth that more work always equals better work. For Einstein, the motivation was just on a different planet from his peers. He wasn't driven by the anxiety of deadlines or the ambition of making a name for himself. The goal was never just to complete a job, publish a paper, or get tenure. It was this humble, almost spiritual attempt to just comprehend the profound, beautiful mystery of the universe. He was playing with a deep sense of awe. The important thing is not to stop questioning. I mean, this quote says it all. This wasn't just a nice motto for him. It was his license to operate. It was the permission slip he gave himself to spend a whole decade wrestling with a single question that seemed absurd to everybody else. It was this fundamental belief that in the search for truth, there's no such thing as failure. There is only a prolonged, patient, and necessary form of learning. His productivity was really built on 4 powerful pillars. There was awe, a genuine, childlike sense of wonder for the natural world. Humility, seeing his work as a small, humble attempt to grasp an infinite mystery. Simplicity, adopting an almost monastic lifestyle to avoid the distractions of fame and stuff. And finally, patience, the deep, unshakable belief that the most important work cannot and should not be rushed. Together, these pillars created the psychological fortress he needed for sustained, deep work. Okay, but a philosophy is pretty useless without a system to back it up, right? That brings us to part 4, a routine for revolution. This is the practical daily structure Einstein built to turn his profound beliefs into tangible, world-changing reality. His number 1 tool was the Gedankenexperiment, or the thought experiment. Now, this wasn't just idle daydreaming. It was a rigorous mental ritual. He would visualize these physical scenarios, like riding that light beam or imagining himself in a freely falling elevator, and he'd play them out in his mind with intense focus, looking for fundamental contradictions in the accepted laws of physics. It was his way of turning this unbelievably complex physics into an intuitive, visual puzzle that he could solve in his head. In his entire daily life was organized around one powerful principle: maximal recovery and minimal distraction. He understood a truth that we so often forget in our hyper-connected world. Our capacity for intense, deep work is a finite, precious resource. His whole routine was meticulously designed not just to use that resource, but to protect and replenish it. So here's what that actually looks like. He'd have a period of intense, focused work for just 2 to 3 hours in the morning at his desk. That's it. That was the sprint. Then, and this is critical, came the cognitive reset, a non-negotiable hour-long siesta, or nap, every afternoon. This wasn't laziness. It was a strategic part of his process. Finally, his afternoons were often for mindful wandering, long, solitary walks where his mind could continue to mull over problems in a low-pressure way. The rest and the walks weren't breaks from the work, they were the work. So what's the result of all this? What happens when you have such a slow, deliberate, patient process? Well, that brings us to part 5, the legacy of patience. This is where the quiet work of a humble clerk explodes into a global revolution, forever changing how we see the universe and our place in it. The scale of his journey is just staggering. I mean, he starts as this obscure patent clerk, totally unknown, and becomes a global icon of intellectual freedom and curiosity. His abstract philosophical ideas about space and time become the practical, foundational tech for things we use every single day, like the GPS in your phone, which literally has to account for relativity to work. And his simple method of just questioning the basics ends up transforming the scientific method itself. His life basically provides a timeless blueprint for innovation. He taught us that true breakthroughs don't come from chasing the latest trends, but from patiently questioning the fundamental assumptions that everyone else just takes for granted. He proved that the deepest work requires creating psychological spaciousness, freedom from constant distraction and pressure. His simple lifestyle showed that protecting your focus is a conscious choice. And maybe most importantly, his legacy proves that the most valuable work is almost always the work that refuses to be rushed. And this brings us to our final and maybe most important chapter, where we turn this story back to you. Part 6, the speed of your pause. What can the Einstein playbook teach us about our own work, our own lives, in a world that never, ever seems to slow down? If you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The speed of your thought is determined not by how fast you work, but by the quality of your pause. The real breakthroughs, the game-changing insights, they happen in those quiet moments of contemplation that you deliberately create and fiercely protect. So how can you actually adopt this? First, protect your time. I mean it. Actually schedule unpressured time for deep thought into your calendar, just like you would a meeting. Treat it as sacred. Second, dare to ask the fundamental questions in your field, the simple or obvious problems that everyone else has stopped thinking about. And third, practice visualizing contradictions. Use thought experiments to actively challenge your own assumptions and the accepted wisdom all around you. And so, I'll leave you with a final, challenging question. Take a look at your own work, your own life. Are you measuring your value by your output, the number of emails you send, tasks you complete, hours you log? Or are you measuring it by the depth of your focus and the quality of your questions? Because ultimately, the lesson from Einstein's quiet revolution is that true progress doesn't come from frantic activity. Instead, the deepest insights, the ones that truly change things, the ones that remake the universe, well, they only emerge when you give your mind the necessary space to wander.